There comes a point in every survivor's journey where guilt becomes the weapon used to chain their progress. It's not the kind of guilt that grows from true wrongdoing, but the kind that is planted and watered by manipulation. The narcissist understands that guilt is a leash. They tug on it when they sense you're about to walk away, when your clarity threatens their control, when your self-worth begins to bloom beyond their reach. They twist empathy into weakness and compassion into compliance, and soon you find yourself apologizing for simply existing differently than they want you to. In those moments, the mind becomes a battlefield. You replay every interaction, searching for the fault they insist belongs to you. You question your tone, your timing, your intentions, until you're convinced you've somehow wronged them. But what you're really feeling isn't guilt, it's conditioning. Years of emotional training designed to make you prioritize their comfort over your peace. They want you small, uncertain, apologetic, because the moment you stop feeling guilty is the moment you stop being controlled. True healing begins when you stop defending yourself to the person who built their power on misunderstanding you. When you recognize that your empathy is not a weakness to be corrected, but a strength that needs protection. It begins when you take back the narrative they twisted and choose to believe that you are not the villain in a story written by someone who fears accountability. This is not about revenge. It's about release, about learning that walking away from guilt that isn't yours is not coldness, it's clarity. And once you understand that, the chains they forged with your own kindness will finally begin to break. Breaking free from the trap of manufactured guilt begins the moment you recognize that not every feeling of guilt is real. Some of it is planted, carefully constructed by those who thrive on emotional confusion. When someone repeatedly makes you feel responsible for their moods, their reactions, or their pain, it's not compassion they're seeking, it's control. They twist your empathy into obligation, convincing you that love means sacrifice without boundaries, that caring means compliance, that being good means being silent. Slowly, you start to carry burdens that were never yours to begin with, apologizing for things you didn't do, shrinking yourself to preserve their comfort, losing sight of where their emotions end and yours begin. The freedom you seek isn't found in proving your innocence to them. It's found in reclaiming your truth for yourself. It's in realizing that you are not the cause of their chaos, and you don't have to fix what they refuse to take responsibility for. The moment you stop explaining your worth and start believing it, their power dissolves. You begin to see that guilt was never love. It was a cage disguised as concern. And when you finally choose to let that false guilt fall away, you rediscover a version of yourself that is lighter, stronger, and untouchable by their manipulation. Reclaiming your power through emotional detachment is not about becoming cold or heartless. It is about learning to protect your peace from those who feed on emotional reactions. A narcissist thrives on your energy, your attention, your frustration, and your attempts to explain yourself. Every emotional response you give becomes fuel for their control, a reminder that they can still reach inside you and twist your sense of self. Emotional detachment is the quiet revolution that begins when you decide to no longer dance to the rhythm of their manipulation. It's when you stop trying to convince them to see your side and start focusing on how to preserve your sanity. There's a kind of strength that comes from choosing silence over reaction. When you detach emotionally, you begin to see their tactics for what they are, a cycle designed to provoke you into guilt, fear, or self-doubt. The moment you stop feeding that cycle, you reclaim your authority over your own emotions. You begin to understand that their chaos no longer needs to become your crisis. You stop over-explaining, stop defending, stop internalizing their projections. You start observing instead of absorbing. It's a profound shift, one that feels unnatural at first because empathy taught you to respond, and narcissistic conditioning taught you to overextend. But real healing begins when you understand that peace often looks like distance detachment doesn't mean you stop caring about people. It means you stop caring about how they want you to feel. You learn that it's not your job to fix their unhappiness or soften their anger. You see their guilt trips, their silent treatments, their blame shifting, and you no longer interpret them as reflections of your worth. Instead, you see them as the defense mechanisms of someone who cannot handle accountability. And once you view their behavior through that lens, their words lose their power. You no longer take on the responsibility for their discomfort. You begin to breathe again without the weight of their opinions pressing against your chest. This kind of detachment is a practice, not a single moment of awakening. Some days you'll still feel the pull to react, to defend, to make them understand your heart. But over time, the silence grows stronger than the need to be understood. You realize that peace doesn't come from resolution with them. It comes from alignment with yourself. The greatest act of strength is not proving your goodness to someone determined to misunderstand you. It's knowing your goodness so deeply that no amount of manipulation can make you question it. Emotional detachment is the boundary that says, I will no longer give you the power to define how I feel. And with that, you begin to live from a place that is calm, clear, and free, untouched by the storm they keep trying to drag you into. Understanding their game begins with recognizing that the narcissist's survival depends on control. They construct a world where accountability feels like an attack and empathy becomes a weakness to exploit. Their goal isn't understanding, it's dominance. They know that if they can make you feel responsible for their pain, their moods, or their failures, they can keep you emotionally bound to them. They weaponize your kindness, turning every disagreement into a guilt trip and every boundary into a betrayal. They rewrite reality so that your needs become selfish, your emotions become overreactions, and your efforts are never enough. In that distortion, you begin to lose sight of what's true, constantly trying to adjust yourself to meet standards that were never meant to be met. They need you to feel responsible because it keeps you trapped in the loop of repair. When you're always fixing, apologizing, and explaining, you have no energy left to see the manipulation clearly. You become addicted to the idea that if you can just do things right, they will finally treat you with kindness. But that day never comes because the goalposts keep moving. They thrive on your confusion, on your emotional investment, on your hope that change is possible. As long as you keep trying to make peace, they never have to face their own chaos. Every time you take the blame, they win another round of emotional control. The truth is, you were never responsible for their behavior. You didn't cause their anger, their emptiness, or their dissatisfaction. Those emotions existed long before you, and they will continue long after you're gone. What they seek in you is not love, but regulation, a way to soothe their fragile ego when reality threatens to expose their lack of depth. They cannot hold themselves accountable because accountability requires humility, and humility threatens the illusion they live by. So instead, they offload their discomfort onto you, sculpting a narrative where you are the cause and they are the victim. And for a while, it works, until you start to question why you always feel guilty around someone who never apologizes. Breaking that illusion is where your power begins to return. You start to see the manipulation for what it is, and something inside you shifts. The fog begins to clear, and you realize that your empathy has been used as a leash. You begin to understand that guilt was the glue holding the cycle together, and when you remove your sense of responsibility for their emotions, the entire structure starts to crumble. They lose the power to define your worth, and you regain the ability to define your boundaries. Understanding their game isn't about fighting them, it's about no longer playing. It's about choosing truth over confusion, peace over performance, and self-respect over guilt. When you finally see that you were never the problem, you stop carrying the weight that was never yours to hold. Choosing self-respect over their approval is one of the hardest yet most liberating decisions you will ever make. It means finally understanding that no amount of pleasing, explaining, or bending will ever be enough for someone who thrives on control. A narcissist's approval is a mirage. It appears within reach when you're doing what they want, but it disappears the moment you begin to assert your needs. They keep you chasing validation they never intend to give, because as long as you are seeking their approval, you are living by their rules. You start to trade your peace for their temporary praise, your authenticity for their acceptance, your truth for their comfort. And somewhere in that cycle, you begin to forget who you were before you felt you had to earn love. Self-respect begins when you stop performing for people who refuse to see your worth. It is the quiet awakening that happens when you realize that you no longer need to convince someone to treat you with decency. You stop trying to win them over and start focusing on honoring yourself. That shift is painful because it often means losing the relationship, the illusion, and the hope that one day they would finally see your value. But in that loss comes the greatest freedom you will ever experience, the ability to look at yourself without shame. You start to recognize that love that demands your silence is not love, that validation that depends on submission is not approval worth keeping. Their disapproval will come swiftly when you begin to set boundaries. They will call you cold, distant, or selfish. They will accuse you of changing, when in truth, you are simply reclaiming yourself. The same traits they once admired, your strength, your independence, your empathy, will now threaten them because those qualities remind them that they can no longer control you. It's in that moment that you must choose again, to stay small for their comfort or to stand tall for your dignity. And every time you choose self-respect, the guilt begins to lose its grip. You start to breathe in your own power instead of exhaling it for their approval. Choosing yourself does not make you unkind, it makes you whole. It means understanding that their opinion of you is not the mirror of your worth. It's realizing that you can love people and still refuse to be diminished by them. It's knowing that your peace is more valuable than their validation, that your boundaries are not barriers but shields protecting what's sacred within you. When you stop waiting for their approval, you begin to approve of yourself, and that self-acceptance becomes unshakable. That is the moment when you step into a version of yourself that no longer needs to beg for recognition, because you have already given yourself what they never could: respect, peace, and freedom. Turning guilt into growth begins with understanding that guilt is not always a reflection of wrongdoing, but often a residue left behind by manipulation. When you've spent years being conditioned to feel responsible for someone else's emotions, walking away feels like betrayal. The narcissist programs you to equate leaving with cruelty, boundaries with selfishness, and peace with abandonment. So even when you know the relationship is toxic, the guilt clings to you like a shadow. It whispers that you're heartless for wanting distance, ungrateful for demanding respect, unkind for choosing yourself. But that guilt is not a moral compass. It's a form of control designed to keep you tethered to the very pain you're trying to escape. Growth begins when you start to question that guilt instead of obeying it. You ask yourself why you feel bad for protecting your peace, why you apologize for being exhausted, why you explain your boundaries to someone who never respects them, And then you see it clearly. The guilt was never about you doing wrong. It was about them losing power. They taught you to internalize their discomfort as your failure, to mistake their disappointment for your duty. But every moment you resist that conditioning, you reclaim a piece of yourself. You begin to rewrite the story, shifting from victim to survivor, from pleaser to protector of your own spirit. Walking away without looking back isn't about coldness. It's about closure within. It's the moment you understand that not every relationship deserves reconciliation. Some only deserve release. It's when you stop rehearsing conversations in your mind that will never change the outcome, when you stop waiting for apologies that will never come. You begin to accept that your healing doesn't require their understanding, only your permission. And in that acceptance, guilt transforms into wisdom. You start to see that the pain you endured was not wasted. It became the soil from which your strength grew. The guilt that once weakened you now becomes the proof that you cared deeply, that you tried endlessly, that you loved sincerely. And now, it becomes the reason you choose differently. Growth is not about forgetting the past, but learning how to walk through it without being defined by it. You stop needing closure from them because you find it within yourself. You stop measuring your worth through their lens because you see the reflection they distorted. You stop carrying the guilt because it no longer serves the person you are becoming. Each step forward, no matter how small, is an act of self-respect, a declaration that your life belongs to you again. And when you finally walk away without looking back, you realize that the freedom you once feared is the very thing your soul was waiting for all along in the end. Healing from a narcissist's manipulation is not about proving them wrong. It's about remembering who you were before their distortion took hold. It's about standing in the quiet strength of knowing that your empathy was never the problem, your compassion was never the weakness, and your boundaries are not cruelty. You learn that peace doesn't come from their apology, but from your decision to stop seeking it. You stop trying to fix what was never yours to mend and start rebuilding the life that was waiting beneath the guilt. Every step away from their control is a step toward yourself, and every moment of clarity is a victory over the confusion they tried to keep you in freedom. Begins the moment you no longer need their validation to feel worthy. You realize that walking away wasn't abandonment, it was survival. Choosing yourself wasn't selfish, it was sacred. The guilt they planted becomes the seed of your growth, and what once felt like loss transforms into liberation. You no longer live to be understood by those who refuse to see you. You live to understand yourself fully and fearlessly, and that is where your true healing begins.